wonderful Valley Talk program with Dr. Marc Peipoch, who's with us this evening. I'll tell you a little bit more about him in a minute. First, I just would like to ask who we have with us here tonight. I've seen an FOW board member and lots of volunteers. Is anyone here a new member? Not a friend? First time FOWer? First Valley Talk for anyone? No. Okay, great. First Valley Talk. Yes, thank you. Thanks for coming. So I will not dig super deep into who FOW is because it sounds like we've got a lot of friends here with us tonight. And my clicker's not working. Friends of the Wissahickon was founded in 1924, and so next year we'll be celebrating our 100th anniversary. We have over 3,000 members and lots more donors, and certainly we are very, very rich in volunteers. We are on track to be around, I'm just going to say the number, 15,000 volunteer hours this year. And that will get us right back to where we were in 2019, which had been a peak year for us before COVID. So now my clicker is working. We do work all over in the park and around the park. So working on conservation, habitat restoration, stream bank restoration, improving our trails and other infrastructure for recreation, enjoyment, and then also engaging in public education events like this, as well as events for education events for Philadelphia's school students to come and visit the park, and from an early age, K through 12. And we also right now have a cohort of interns working with our field team, which we're very excited about. So if you're not already a member or haven't volunteered with us, I really encourage you to do so. You can learn all the ways to do that at FOW.org. I'd also like to say thank you to our sponsor. Events like this, wonderful snacks and beverages and the event space and all of the equipment it takes to put this on doesn't happen without sponsors. And one of our sponsors is Prentice Smith & Company. Prentice Smith & Company has provided performance-driven, environmentally and socially responsible investment since 1982. They believe that rewarding positive environmental and social change with investment capital can amplify that change. So we're very grateful to have their continued support for this series. And now it's my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Marc Peipoch, who is a freshwater ecologist and a research scientist at Stroud Water Research Center, who investigates the effects of global change on streams and rivers. And we have one of those right here. And so I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Peipoch now, and I'll be back for Q&A in a little bit. So,
all right,
there you go.
That good? Well, thank you all for being here, and those of you who join online as well. I gotta say, it's really a pleasure to be here. I'm just learning all these organizations, what you do. You see, I grew up in Europe, northeast of Spain, and we just don't have that kind of organization and communities that get together, different kind of people around the watershed. It keeps amazing. I've been living in the US for more than 10 years, and the more I know about groups like this one, I keep being blown away. I've been told that I got big shoes to fill, that you had somebody here about a week ago that was showing pictures of wildlife and pretty birds. And you know, I've got to say, I can't compete with that. I'm gonna lose that battle. That's not what we do. I have to work harder to keep you awake. I thought that really the thing I could show you that it's closest to wildlife would be my children. And I could spend the next 30 minutes convincing you that their behavior is pretty close to wildlife behavior. You know, but what I really want to tell you about them is that they're great kids. Each one of them is a piece of work. And my wife and I can handle them one at a time. We usually can solve their problems when it comes one at a time. You put them all together, well, you're just waiting for disaster. You're just waiting for something to happen, get out of scale. You know, something unexpected is going to happen. You just don't know why. The reason I'm telling you this is because what I've been observing is that it's just not only putting the three of them together. It's really one of them we're not going to say his name, that he's pretty good at making his brothers a little worse. He knows how to push those buttons. He knows how to, he's a good trigger. He makes those problems that we could address when they're one at a time a little harder to solve. And that's really my message for you today about climate change. Is that not only, climate change is a big problem, big challenge, probably the biggest, but I think people usually don't think about how much worse it makes other problems we have in the watershed. They were hard enough on their own. Climate change makes it worse. It intensifies it. Climate change is that kid. What I'm talking, and sorry about that, this came out a little weird here, but it's, think of climate change in the middle, the big challenge, but around it, we've been modifying the landscape in many ways. We've been developing urban development, suburban, urban, parking lots, roads. I'm talking about building impervious surfaces all around. We keep having to increase our intensive agriculture activities, more people in the planet, gotta feed them all. We've been building dams everywhere, channelizing rivers, building ditches, moving water from one watershed to the other. Pretty good at that. Been doing it for much longer than climate change has been a thing. And we also have a problem with species, and we're just moving all around. We're moving species ourselves when we move north to south, east to west, and invasive species are really becoming a big problem. All that around climate change. So really the equation for today is climate change plus other problems. It's hard enough to handle them, individually. Put them all together, big trouble. And that's really a little bit the wake-up call we're getting, that things are getting a little bit out of scale sometimes. We're getting things that it's just, the model didn't predict it, or that was unexpected. We're just adding these problems and boom, comes back at you. Kids. So that's my message, really. I like to start, if you have to remember one thing from this talk, it's this, that climate change makes every other problem in our watershed worse. I think probably with this audience, all of you have a pretty good idea of what a watershed is. Kids not, said this word a few times, and if that's something you're saying, well, what's really a watershed? Well, let's talk about it. The watershed, it's a pretty simple concept, actually, and pretty handy. Think of a piece of land, a portion of the land, in which any water that will fall within those boundaries will end up in the same location, that location being the stream. Best analogy you can think of is the bathtub. When you're taking a shower, every splash or every drop of water that falls within that ends up in the drain. The drain is the stream. It will get there through groundwater. It will get there through surface runoff when the soil cannot take anymore, but it will get there. Eventually, the watershed concentrates all that water into the stream. If you think harder about it, we're always on a watershed. No matter where you are, if your feet are on the ground, you are in a watershed. You don't know where you are, chances are you're in the Mississippi River Basin because it's huge. But you're always on a watershed. That's important to say. You don't get away. It's kind of like the actions you do will matter to somebody downstream, no matter what. Always in a watershed. Most of them end up in the ocean, some don't, but always in a watershed. And perhaps for today, we got to start talking about this watershed, one we are right now, right? The Wissahickon watershed. There are a couple things that catch my attention about this watershed that I want to mention to you that I think they are pretty important. One is more on the right of this slide. One is its location. And that matters because the Wissahickon watershed is within the bigger picture of the Delaware River watershed. But look at where it is, right down here. Anything that comes out of this watershed, it doesn't have to travel far to get into the bay. So when you hear about problems going on in the Delaware Bay, the Wissahickon can play a bigger role on it because it's right here. It's the same watershed with the same development, same amount of pollution, everything. You put it up here. Rivers don't do magic. They don't, remove pollution. They don't really self-purify like sometimes I've seen out there. They don't have that, wish they had that ability. But they do transform some of it. They're just not that great. So if the watershed was to be up here, anything coming out of these watersheds would have to go all the way down in the Delaware River. And by the time you get to the bay, things would be different. But unfortunately for these watersheds, you are located right there. So it matters a lot. If you have a twin brother of the watershed and you put it out there, well, that one would matter most for the bay because it's right here. It's very close. What comes out of this mouth joins the Schuylkill and it's already in the bay. So location matters in that sense. And the second thing I want to highlight is this plot down here. You can read, that's fine. What this shows us is the dominant land uses of the landscape. Everything in green, in red, brownish, kind of these four altogether, those are different levels of development, urban development. If you put them all together, you're looking at, really haven't made the numbers, but 60, 70% of some sort of development in the watershed, maybe even more. And that's a lot. In a way that the Wissahickon watershed is a great example, a paramount example of an urban watershed. We'll come back to this later. Urban watershed, close to the bay. It's sort of a mid-size, not small, not huge, but relevant. So anything that happens here can teach us a lot of lessons, different sites as well. Because it's an urban watershed, I thought the first thing we should get started is with urban development and how that interacts with climate change. Now, what's climate change doing to rainfall? Well, a variety of things, but perhaps the most important one for us, for this talk, for a river like the Wissahickon, is how it's changing these once in 100 years rain events, these intense storms. Now, we used to have them every now once in a while, and now they seem to be becoming more frequent and stronger. And that's very different if you are in the west or if you're in the east, as you can see in the map. The west is kind of, it's interesting too. We could spend another talk on how snowmelt, snowpack is changing and the timing of the snowmelt, and all the organisms are adapted to have that at the right time. Now it's changing, so interesting stories there as well. In the east, look at the region. We're right there, right? Where things are getting, models are failing to predict how frequent and how intense these storm events, hurricane, tropical storm kind of stuff is happening. That's the climate change part of the story. On top of that, as I said, well, it's not just that. We've been increasing urban development in the area. This is for the greater Philadelphia, but you could do the same plot for any city in the world. Right now, we are already at a point where most people live in cities. We're just growing. That's the way it's going. Urban development, building more and more. And this is example for this area, but it's served for any other metropolis. Put these two together, what happens? Well, I decided to use something, it's called down here, you can't see it that you see me talking, but it says Model My Watershed. You go to modelmywatershed.com. It's sort of like an app. Stroud Center has been involved in this, and you can go there and really play with it as much as you like. You can simulate a storm. You can ask, hey, what happens if we transform all the watersheds from urban to forest? What would that do to a storm event of this size, of that size? You can really get a lot of information. It's built. Anybody could go in there and start learning quite a ton. It does use complex models that we use for our own research. The reason I used it is for these plots that will show the point I'm trying to make pretty clearly. On the left, you see a 3 centimeter precipitation event. That's about 1 inch, so good storm, but we got many of those, a year. Just a good amount. On the right, 21 centimeters, that's about 8 inches. That's a big one. Those ones that are getting more frequent and more intense. If the watershed, like in this case, it's forested, if you're looking at a forest soil, the forest will be able to soak, allow to infiltrate most of that water. Even with the big storm, look at the down, there's almost zero runoff. Runoff means excess water once the infiltration is completed that will get to the stream. On the right, we got a 1.2. That's not a lot. That's what you need to know. Forest will handle that pretty well. What happens when we're looking at the same 2 storms with low intensity development? Think of a suburban houses and lawns and driveways and all that. Look at the same numbers down. Nothing changed up here. Look at down here. Now you get some of it for the small 1-inch event. We went up to 11 centimeters. That's already quite a bit, but bear with me. What about high intensity industry? Well, even worse. And you don't need to pay that much attention at the numbers. I'll summarize them to you here. Now you're looking at the amount of runoff. Think of it as the amount of water that gets to the stream. And now we're going to look at the 1-inch rain event, the one on the left, the 8-inch rain event, the one on the right. What you're looking at right now is not a big difference, right? You have the forest, the suburban development. You really squeeze your eyes and look in there. That's actually 10 times more of water that would get to the stream with a suburban development compared to the forest for a 1-inch storm. But it's still not a lot of water. I'm not concerned. When climate change kicks in, and now you have these big storms, more intense, more often, the same rule applies, same proportion. This bar on the left, this one is also 10 times bigger than this one. But now it's a whole lot more of water. If you have a hard time following this, think of a savings account. You got $10,000 in a saving account and they give you 10%, it would be fantastic. Well, you might be able to buy something out of it, but you cannot with your job. If you have 100 million in it, maybe we're talking, right? So the development part stays the same in the sense that if you got a suburban development versus a forest, you're going to have 10 times more water getting to the stream, so to speak. Climate change part brings more water. And now suddenly we have a whole lot more water to deal with. Look at the difference. You're not convinced? Well, this is for the Wissahickon watershed. Right at the mouth, right before it joins the Schuylkill. What you're looking here, the numbers are not really important. Annual peak flow, so the highest flow, daily flow at the Wissahickon from 1966. I wasn't around, but I've been told that this one was a pretty good one, a once in a lifetime hurricane or tropical storm Agnes. And it was the biggest one on record until the 2000s. Then we have Floyd and Lee and Ida. You could say, well, maybe those ones brought a little bit more water than Agnes thinks. It's hard. You know, sometimes these storms are patchy. Yes, true. But look at the difference. We've changed the paradigm a little bit. Now, all of these storms, look at how much more water the creek has to deal with. No wonder we have the floodings we have. And that's not only because climate change has increased the precipitation, but also because we have all that impervious surface. We have eliminated the ability of the soil to infiltrate water quite a bit. So a storm that was able to be partially absorbed by the watershed, now it's not. And all that water ends up in the creek and it floods. Make sense? So what can we do? I think three things. And the first might be the least important, but I value it because I think everybody at individual level should do your best. And the good thing about infiltration is that anything counts. And if you can do anything within your gardens, planting native species, promoting buffers if you're lucky, fortunate to have a creek in your property, do it. That's great. I converted half of my property in a meadow. I really need the space, and why not? This is something you can do to contribute to promote infiltration, especially critical in urban watersheds. Will that be enough? Well, probably not. So you probably also need, or let's hope, that's probably not in our hands, but to change a little bit on how we build cities at a higher, upper in the hierarchy, right? And that's not, the engineering part, I guess it's done. I mean, we know how to do it. We know what to do it. There are other hoops to jump through, but it can be done to build parking lots that will infiltrate more water, build greenway cities that can infiltrate more water. It's really that simple. It's about water quantity, infiltrate more water. And the last but not least that I like to use, and this is an example very close to where I grew up, so not pertinent for this watershed in particular, but always like to point it out. you're looking at here are two pictures of the same creek. That's one of the worst storms that we had there in the northeast of Spain. The bridge on the left was built, well, literally 1,000 years ago. It's built in the Middle Ages. And it still stands. And it was built tall enough that could swallow a big storm, no problem. The one on the right, built in the 90s, was completely blown away. But the worst part of these pictures is that you know what they did with the bridge on the right? We just built it the same way, waiting for the next one. And I think that's the last thing I want to say about this topic. We got to change that too. We got to accept that things have changed. The paradigm has changed. And it doesn't really matter, like, well, I've lived here for 50 years and never seen this flooding. Well, okay, maybe that doesn't really count anymore. Because we've changed, you put those two kids together, and now big trouble has happened. And these two things are coming unexpected a little bit. So, for instance, with Ida, that I don't know about here, but where I live, closer to Westchester, made a lot of damage. All these things need to be rebuilt, thinking in a different perspective than the one we had before, because there is a new reality. There are other problems that are, in my opinion, a little more complicated to solve than water quantity. Because with water quantity, you can promote anything that infiltrates water, and you're on the good track. The next problem that we're going to talk about is, all right, I get it, more water runoff, more water getting into the streams through these big storms. We can do that, we can handle that. But what about what we've been doing in the landscape? What about the amount of nutrient pollution, chemical pollution that we've been putting in? And that comes in two ways, from agriculture, from urban settings. Put a couple of pictures here to realize that it's not just the fertilizer use, which you probably heard the most, the nitrogen, the phosphorus, those excessive nutrients that plants need, we need, everybody does it, but when there's too much of it, make a mess of aquatic ecosystems, but also other chemical pollution. You're probably hearing about PFAS and drugs we use way too much. All that ends up in the stream because the watershed is good at that, very good at it. Bringing everything in. The stream is the last station. Everything ends up there. And that's a little bit more complicated because it comes with the challenge of like, well, I got to keep growing food too, right? That's not that simple. I like this study a lot. It came out pretty recently. I'll guide you through. They were looking not at nitrogen and phosphorus, and particularly where is it coming from? They were looking at 8 different watersheds, smaller watersheds than the Wissahickon. They're all urban watersheds, but they go from less urban on the left to more urban on the right. Same here. The thing I want you to look is that incredibly fluorescent green. That's residential fertilizer. I think we usually think way too frequently about like, oh, fertilizer, farmers, ag fields, agriculture. Well, that's a problem too in urban settings. Most people, I don't really have the numbers, but we all like that green, perfect lawn. You don't get that unless you put fertilizer in it and herbicides and all that. And that really ends up in the stream, as they beautifully demonstrated. On the right, that usually comes even more of a surprise. The pink one, pet waste. The dogs and the cats, and that counts. You have all those waste and the fertilizer could be in your lawn and it's fairly, locked up there. But if you have increased runoff, and cities are pretty good at moving that water to the stream, now all those excess pollution is reaching the stream more often than not, or at least more often than before. That's where things get interesting. You start making all these connections I was talking at the beginning with Michael. Stronger storms, more runoff, because we have more impermeable surfaces, more people, more fertilizer. And then at some point you're going to say, I thought climate change was about the warming. Yeah, correct. We also have global warming. That's it, right? That doesn't go away. We got warmer temperatures and we have less water during the summer. You put that out, all these together, it brings you to the algal blooms. Maybe you've heard about it, maybe not. It's usually a lake issue. I want to make it a river issue as well today. That happens to in our watershed. Harmful algal blooms, again, algae like nutrients, they are not inherently bad. You can think of algae as grass in a grassland. It's absolutely necessary. It is the base of the food web. We wouldn't have these ecosystems without algae. But as usually we have too much of it, then it's a problem. It's a problem mostly at night, because algae will produce oxygen during the day through photosynthesis, just like plants do. But at night, they won't. But they keep respiring, they keep breathing. Then they consume oxygen. And if they grow too much, they'll consume so much oxygen that will bring it down enough in the water that fish, insects, any animal living in it will suffocate. That's number one problem of having too much algae blooms. Dead zones, they call it. Pretty appropriate name. And algae can kick back pretty fast. You know, they're pretty smart. Animals cannot. Usually once fish is done, it's done, or when insect is done, it's done. So this is a big problem, and I'm not backing it up with data. Could be wrong, but it seems to be getting worse and worse. And it used to be also like, oh, got an algal bloom here, got an algal bloom there. And now, you know, any pond has an algal bloom in it, any lake that it's not big enough, like the Great Lakes, and even the Great Lakes have a bloom in it. Streams have blooms in it too. And the Wissahickon in particular would be my top 3. There's a great group of people that I was telling Rufian before, Laura Turan in Temple University. They've been doing some work in the Wissahickon River watershed, right here. This plot, I'll just tell you what you need to know about this plot. It's measuring algal abundance. Doesn't matter how, doesn't matter the units. What it matters, you see these 2 large bars that really get, you know, compared to the others are much larger. Well, this picture is not from the Wissahickon, but it's from another river with these same levels of algae. You see this? That's impairment. That's too much algae. And the same problems with oxygen can occur. And the same problems making it difficult for lots of other species to live in the creek will occur if you have that much algae. And you get to have that much algae when you put all that in the mix of more storms, bring in more nutrients stay there, summer comes, it's warmer, boom. Algae can wait their moment, they'll seize it. We're just giving them everything. And then during the summer, you got it. They sample below Sandy Run conflicts. Another thing that's important for this watershed is this. Now, there's quite a bit of wastewater treatment effluents coming into it. Many urban watersheds have this problem. You can make the numbers between 5 and 30 million gallons a day. Now you can think, how is that compared to the water that comes out down here? Well, in the summer, you might be looking between 10 and 50% of the water in the Wissahickon Creek during the summer coming out of a wastewater treatment facility. Now water is being treated, and wastewater treatment facilities do a wonderful job. They're just not 100% efficient. They will still load into the creek a fair amount of nutrient pollution and other pollutants. They're not perfect. Don't get me wrong. They're saving the world, and we need more of them, but they're just not perfect. And Laura's team actually estimated this same number down here. And sometimes some years, that number can get to 90%. We have 100% constantly. We know the water comes from wastewater treatment facilities. So from our houses, our industry. It's been treated and everything. But it's nowhere near pristine or natural water. And algae will have a great time. And that's really, when I said that Wissahickon is a perfect example for a urban watershed, it is. Recently finished, some colleagues and myself, a study which we look at, we put it here to remember, 300 studies all around the world. We were interested in saying, okay, we've got all these stressors going on. You've got wastewater, you've got agriculture, you've got dams, you've got everything. What's the worst one? We got to prioritize. Which one should we tackle first? And wastewater came to the top. What you're looking at here is an index for stream health in Turkey. So this is a #1 priority or concern that climate change makes for us, but climate change alone wouldn't do it. Another thing that comes out of wastewater treatment facilities that we don't thinking of are other pollutants, like chemicals and salt as well, from our day-to-day operations, from industrial operations. And on top of that, you've probably been hearing on the news, we might be using too much road salt that ends up in the streams, right? But a lot of attention gets into these spikes of salt in the winter, which are a problem, right? And those big storms that climate change is provoking, there'll be a problem with that. But really for today, I wanted to tell you a little bit more of the long-term problem of this salt issue. Got colleagues at the Stroud Center, entomologists, to look at how much, how salt and temperature interact with each other. What happens when temperature is higher? You've all experienced that. You go for a run or biking when it's hot out there and you sweat and your metabolism goes up. You're breathing way faster than what it would if it was wintertime. So do insects. And if they breathe faster and their metabolism is faster, the toxicity of things like salt gets worse. The sensitivity they have to salt gets higher. What this plot is showing you, again, no need to pay a lot of attention in the details of the units, is that at higher temperatures, you will kill 50% of these animals with 3,000 milligrams per liter. High, but not huge concentration. Compared to 5 or 10 degrees, you would need a whole lot more of salt. In warmer waters, salt is a bigger threat to these animals. And salt accumulates in the groundwater, and salt will come out during the summer too. So it's just not a winter problem of, oh, we had spikes, problem solved. Even if we stop today, those problems will take a while to fix them because they get into the groundwater, and that moves slow. And last, but not least, I wanted to talk two other things. Dams, just because I know I was recently here, we know we have one down there, and species, invasive species. But before that, fish. I'm sorry about the poor quality of this plot, but fish are having a hard time with climate change as well because they can't escape in a way. And what I wanted to say today is that I see a lot of salmon and trout always get the news, and they are such iconic species. We've got chops and dace and other creatures around here that they are not that cold water fish, but they also have a hard time when water gets really too warm. There's a variety of species down here, all the ones you see in black, but they are losing habitat, and some others are benefiting from it. Who? Carp. Lots of carp at the Brandywine, where I work quite a bit. Bluegill at the Christina River, they colonize it. There's a certain amount of bluegill. Some species of fish will benefit, they are benefiting it, and some others are taking the toll. I don't really work with fish enough to tell you more about it, but this is just not a Wissahickon problem or a regional problem, pretty much national issue that not only trout, many other species, equally relevant, just not that cool, not that fun to fish, but they're also losing habitat. Something that hits more home about invasive species and climate change, warmer summers, and this nutrient pollution is this little snail, New Zealand mud snail. You look like you haven't heard from it, and that's good news, but it's here. There have been observations all around the Delaware River Basin, including the Wissahickon, the Schuylkill, Musconetcong. In some places, there have even been reports that not just observing it, but this thing can get very abundant. Look what they like. Tolerate high sediment loads, like disturbed watersheds, fantastic with algal blooms. They eat algae, so I'll be happy with that. And again, we are changing all these conditions that are opening the door to these species like that. This was used to been in the west of the United States for a while. Here, seems to be getting in. That's something we're trying to work on it, because it seems that sometimes it kind of blows out and starts growing, some others doesn't. So we're trying to understand a little bit what and when, why in some places it becomes really a problem and others it's just there, but it seems to have a hard time colonizing it. It can clone itself, so this thing can go fast. And finally, dams. I've done quite a bit of work with these meal dams. And actually, the first time I was here, I visited a dam not far from here. I don't remember the name, but pretty good sized meal dam. Probably all know about the story of these dams, why they were built, and what's going on right now. Right? Most of them, we don't use them for much anymore. That's for sure. But the reason that motivated me to start working on them was that I saw there was a little bit of a debate or not misunderstanding, but lack of understanding about whether or not these meal dams can really make a change in water quality. Can they make a difference? With dams, we usually make the mistake to think that large dams, like the ones that are coming out now at the Klamath River, probably see that in the news, or other big dams. We think that what happens in there will happen in small dams as well, and that's not really the case. So we've done work on these dams for 4 or 5 years. We really haven't seen huge changes in water quality in the sense of water getting much warmer or nutrient pollution going away or being increased. We haven't really. It doesn't mean at all that I'm saying these dams don't need to go. These dams need to go for the fish, and because they are a problem for humans too. People die in these dams every year because if you pull around, it can actually trap you in the bottom of it. So they got to go. But as we've learned from research, they are more detrimental than beneficial, of course, but they're small and not big enough to seem to be making a huge difference. And if you want to know more about this, we just, in our newsletter, we have a little article summarizing this. But really don't want to take more of your time. It was the middle child. It's always the middle child. You know it. He's the climate change problem. That's really what I want you to remember, because you're all probably advocates and stewards of the land. And I think we usually climate change, we just think of climate change like global warming. And that's, again, the big problem. But it is making every other problem much worse. And we could solve other problems one at a time. But now, sometimes, it's just getting pretty crazy. And that's all I have. I'll take questions.
Thank you so much. I really appreciated the highlighting of some of the key
I tried.
key stressors, and I'm sure that middle child of yours will improve.
He'll be fine.
He'll probably be in charge.
Yeah.
So we have one question so far online from our friends on Zoom. I'm going to take that question, and then I will take questions in the room. I'm going to repeat the questions in the room so that our friends on Zoom can hear them, because all of you out watching here are not mic'd. So the one question I have from Zoom is, does salt or other pollutants remain held in the sediment of the stream bed as well? How long could it continue to be released and impact the water quality, wildlife, insects?
Yeah, great question. I'll have to answer first the salt and then the other chemicals.
Okay.
For the salt, not really bound to the sediment.
Yeah.
But if we get into the groundwater moves very slowly. So you can think of it as a tank where you store water, and it will come out slowly. And if you keep adding something there for decades, well, then you're going to have a problem to clean that up for decades, right? In slowly, out slowly. But it doesn't really get bound to the sediment and travels with the sediment, at least not primarily. Other chemicals, that would really depend on what chemical we're talking about. But some do, some others don't. Organic matter also is a good glue of pollutants and sediment.
You showed us that the largest factor to go waste. I mean, they're all important. Obviously.
Yeah.
We have many leverage ways to improve our environment. Thinking about wastewater in particular, for this region, we have a sense of how much of that wastewater is coming from residential versus small commercial and large commercial.
So we have a question about the source of the wastewater, and I'm going to let you answer it, even though I feel like I know.
Oh no, then go.
No, you go, please.
No, I don't really know the numbers. If you do, go for it.
But it's all, whether it's residential or commercial, it's all coming through those treatment plants, right? So,
My point is,
You're asking for the proportions.
yeah,
Oh.
that's in that proportion, but my point is also is, we hear many different things. Guided height, we talk about things that you can do as a community member. We don't hear a whole lot about reducing our water waste.
Oh, that's a good point.
And so, if this is a major factor for our watershed, what kind of efforts in terms of education of our community do we need to be doing to reduce water, both toilets and showers, things like that?
Yeah.
But I'm thinking about other potential things that we could leverage.
Well, you can certainly start. Yeah, it's a good question, and the answer, in my opinion, is complex. But
yeah, I think all the things that Mark was talking about, the improvements you can make on your property, we should be encouraging all residential properties and commercial properties. And, when these ordinances come up for a vote, whether you're in the city or in one of the adjacent townships, the controls for what is getting put into the wastewater, both the wastewater and the stormwater treatment, where all of that is going, will make a difference. I think it gets complicated in a system where the utility makes its money to do things based on your customers who use water, then how do you encourage that conservation from just a water quantity standpoint versus for them to then have the money to do all of the water quality work that they need to do?
Yeah. I agree. And I would add, there's so many things that you could do, change in your life that will affect that. For instance, the amount of meat that you will consume will affect how much nitrogen is in your urine. That's one thing for it. But ultimately, everything matters. And the best story, and maybe some of you remember, is that in the 70s, when the Great Lakes were much worse than now, it was all about phosphorus coming from detergents. Because phosphorus, what it does is the soap to work better, right? Remove the hardness of the water, so to speak. So people liked it. Oh, it's foamy, cleans up the clothes. And the detergent industry fought hard to keep using phosphorus. And it required one of the most iconic pictures of a research study with a lake split in half, showing with phosphorus, algal bloom, without phosphorus, no algae, to convince people, government, I guess, to actually put that in law. Because it was hard to believe that something like really, detergents, changing the lakes, right? Many times, probably all of us here, to some degree, it comes like, oh yeah, that makes sense. But many people, you have no idea what a watershed is, or really poor connection with nature, whether you want it or not. You're going to have a hard time putting those two together, right? Wait a second, my water ends up in that creek. My experience, usually people don't think of it like that. Your water ends up in the creek, right? Because they think they're
creek winds up in
or
your
the
water.
creek under your water, yeah. And some other things. That's one thing that I would say, but also that's at an individual level. Again, lots of things we all can do. Always in favor. My opinion might not be enough. Again, for instance, if you have these same 5 wastewater treatment effluents in the Wissahickon, spread it around. They're pretty much all concentrated in the upper part. Process some of that. But by the time it's processing one, another one comes in, and another one comes in. Well, just hard to recover. So if you can modify that, that would be great. Sometimes that's no longer an option, right? It's difficult. And again, where I grew up, there's either that or no water in the creek. So it is a problem. But yeah, I think anything that reduces nutrients mostly, I would go for that. Wastewater treatment plants are designed to remove organic matter and nutrients if they have what is called a tertiary treatment. Sometimes they don't. So
We have another question from our friends on Zoom. As flood volumes increase for more intense storms, what are the aquatic impacts of eroding banks and wider, shallower creek channels? I'm not sure that those two go quite.
Wider and shallower eroding banks. The biggest consequences would be, when that really happens, is that sediment will go down to the bay and other places, and sediment is in the list of these pollutants. And it also, on a more natural perspective, it also change, going to humanize them. Everybody who lives in a creek was used to a certain frequency and intensity of storms. If you've changed that, it's pretty hard on that, because like the two mayflies or these insects, you wouldn't believe their time. It's do things when they're supposed to do it, when temperature change, when that change, and you're messing with that timing, you really mess up the life cycle of many species. So bank erosion, sure, it's a problem, but also perhaps because I'm more of a biologist than a geologist, but I'm biased, I'll accept that. But in my opinion, the worst part is what happens on the organism part, kind of taking a lot of people by surprise, and on us, of course.
I'm going to take one more from Zoom, and then I'm going to come back to the room. If we're trying to educate folks on the threats to healthy watersheds, what are the most important points to make?
Trying to educate
What's the
kids
top
or
takeaway?
adults?
Well, they said folks.
Oh, folks. Okay.
So everybody, what would be the one thing? If we could walk away tonight with one thing that each one of these people gives to somebody else, what's that one thing?
For climate change?
Threats to healthy watersheds.
Threats to healthy watersheds. Humans.
Stop fertilizing your lawn.
That's a pretty easy one, right? Yeah, that's one you can do. Yeah, I could have two answers. One, that would be my realistic one,
Right.
Because that's something that
one thing you can do, and then one, I think that's a good action individuals can do.
Oh, action, that's right.
But then what's something, like, what is the priority for collective action? Like, that would be more like policy change that you would see, or that's more of a community, whether that community is a town or the whole planet.
Boy, that's a good one. Kind of caught me by surprise. Let me get back to it.
Okay, we'll circle back. If we don't get that answer tonight,
I'm
we'll
sorry.
run it in the newsletter. It's okay. This isn't a game show. There's no.
Yeah, just
okay.
don't like to be inaccurate.
Yes, in the back there.
I know walking around something that through a lot of the road and obvious so my question is there any way that you can achieve the fact that you're doing something like watershed or whatever to keep those moving, on the people, is there some other way other than
Yeah.
So we have a question in the room about a good. This is the triangle, which I'm told you never get. Good, cheap, and fast, which is like easy. You're lucky if you get two of those things. So, but the good, cheap, and fast way to prevent or restore, repair erosion in the Wissahickon, I'd love to know what it is. What is it? I can talk about what we do, but
Yeah, well, I don't know about cheap or expensive, but fast, I don't know about that. My take, and I don't really do restoration. Pretty much do research, more applied or less, but my hand's clean, and I'm not in the business of restoration. Yeah. To me, when your banks like down here, did you mean down in this area?
And trails up in the woods.
But in this area or upper of the hills?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Two things. One, that's not necessarily bad. It might not like it, especially if your property is nearby, and then you have to deal with it, of course. But this is a natural process. A channel, it's not static. Channel moves around and it will erode here and accumulate there. That's one thing. I'm not saying that's what
Makes
happens or that we should walk away. Many times when that happens, it will likely be coming from upstream. Because if you have too much water, or more water than what the watershed should have, because we built impervious surfaces and now there's less infiltration, all that water still needs to go to the same pipe, and it's got way more power and it will grab what it can, right? That's the urban problem where you gotta do action. What I'm a little bit skeptical about it is that I usually see, solutions on the bank, like building a riprap or acting right there. In my opinion, is that your problem is upstream, and you're trying to take a pill to fix a problem instead of changing your diet, because the problem is up there. And that's why I say that easy, certainly not. Unless we change the way we grow crops, well, not completely, but unless we get better at these big picture solutions, other solutions, they help, they are important. I don't know what you guys do, but I'm sure everybody does good work. But at the end of the day, it usually requires more of a, go to the root of the problem. And in urban watersheds, when you have that kind of problem, most likely you gotta prevent that water getting there in the first place, instead of trying to make that bank stable, because we can do that, but it's not really what the creek require, or at least it's not going to get it any better in terms of stream health. That I can tell.
Yeah.
One thing I noticed if I come down to the creek area after the storm is how much sediment or turbidity there is in the stream. Do we need better regulation of construction sites? I mean, do we know where all that sediment is coming from? Is it from construction sites? Where do we know where it's coming from, and what should we do about it?
So in the Wissahickon, a lot of that sediment that you're seeing is stream banks collapsing, or erosion of smaller streams carrying it, or just the churn and the force of the water coming through is lifting up the sediment that's already there. We've seen powerful water events just here in front of Valley Green Inn, where things that have remained concreted in the ground for 30 years are all of a sudden lifted up, concrete and all, and carried all the way down the stream. So, all of the construction sites should have good ENS, erosion and sedimentation controls. But I don't know that the construction sites are the lone contributor to sediment after a storm. It's everywhere. Right?
I can't tell you about the construction sites in the Wissahickon.
No.
I'll admit that. What I can tell you is that even if you had a stream where no sediment comes from the watershed outside from the channel, even if that was the case, a magical stream where you can say nothing comes except what was already there, you would still see it turbid and muddy. That's what streams do, because they'll resuspend all that sediment, and resuspension happens fast, and then gravity takes its toll in a smaller way. So you usually see all those fine silt and clay particles, 8-10 hours later than the storm had happened. You still see it like that, even if there was no sediment coming from outside, which not the case. I'm sure you got a lot of it with all these construction and other bank erosion and from the lawns, from runoff. Yeah, sediment comes in a variety of ways. I think that Wissahickon is a little peculiar in the sense that the upstream is pretty well urbanized, right? And then you have this patch of forest at the bottom of it.
Here at the very bottom of the watershed is very green, and typically it would be more your headwaters would be
more forested,
and
then more
and it would be your your tailwaters that were developed. And here where the tailwater is green, but we're surrounded not only in the upper portion of the watershed, but then our surrounding banks immediately here. So we are the green stormwater infrastructure for Northwest Philadelphia, which means we have a lot of water that's being channeled into the forested hillside.
And don't get me wrong, it's a good point. It's good to be on the watch out, but you really would need to take a measurement and say, all right, is this too much sediment compared to what we naturally should have or not to answer that question? Because to some extent, that's a natural process.
I'm Chevy to that. So I live in Montgomery County, and 3/4 watershed, so right from Montgomery County. Not too long ago, we were talking to someone from the state conservation department, and what they were saying is their number one effort enforcement of the existing erosion mitigation package we built in Montgomery County to protect water downstream. So they're putting their money enforcement because they get one thing to about that.
Good.
Okay, we have a question here.
What I'm wondering about is, okay, there's a balance between how many people there are, the way they're living, and the health of the watershed. But is there any way that this many people in the watershed would live in healthy harmony with the watershed? That sounds like part of the challenge.
Yeah, great question. And I don't think you're doing that bad, you know. Honestly, I'm a pretty optimistic person. I'll say that. But could be better, but it could be much worse. I don't think, you know, usually we should pat ourselves in the back a little bit more. I mean, people do a lot, and this could be much worse shape than what it is right now. So to your question, no, there's no way you can live in harmony with a perfect stream and that many people in the watershed. You're going to have to pay a price. I think the price, it's a little high now, but there will be a price, and got to keep working at it, getting there. But sure, you know, well, look at the past, right? The Great Lakes story I was telling before. I mean, this was people would not even dare swim in those lakes that were disgusting, and now look at them. Things can be solved, and things can get better. But I like your question in the way you frame it. That yeah, there's no perfect situation in where you can fit that many people in a watershed of this size and see no effects on the stream. No, there will be, no matter what. That's what it is. Yeah.
Yes, in the green.
It sounds like your firm has done studies into this area.
Oh, my firm. I like that. I don't have a firm, but I'll use
Stroud
it.
Water
for now.
Research. Yes.
Yeah. Well, yeah. No, honestly, me in particular, my research group, not really. No, not here in these watersheds.
Okay, so you really. So my bigger question is, overall, how healthy or how unhealthy is the creek?
That's a relative question, right? I can only answer compared to others, I guess, because what the Wissahickon used to be, who knows, right? That's long past, and I don't think anybody has any data to.
Sure.
Yeah.
Stated that this is
This is an impaired. It's an impaired watershed as far as I know.
We have a TMDL.
Yeah, and there are very clear thresholds to determine that say whether it's impaired or not. Clean Water Act, and you know, so what. But I can also say that follow back in. I don't see these as a worst case scenario at all. For the amount of people living in this watershed, for where you are located, and everything's going on, 5 wastewater treatment plants, you know, urban development. Like, hey, not bad, honestly. I've seen watersheds of similar size, similar amount of people.
Yeah, but
How
fair is it for the EPA to classify the watershed as being impaired if the problem, as to your point, is that you know, it's contributing to all of this? How fair is it up to the EPA to really make that kind of comment? I mean, to make that statement.
Well, it should really be for them to answer. In my opinion, I think it's still fair because we do have a good idea of the baselines that should be, and you're not near that. So I guess I'm saying both things. I'm saying like, hey, you're in the good track, but I'm not saying that job is done either. So
Yeah.
Maybe another way of making the question. Care probably big with how we
mhm. Yeah, see, that's the time I wish John Jackson was here. He would
Yes.
answer that question.
I think we do, we'll be happy to share from FOW some other specific studies that have come out of Temple in partnership with the Academy of Natural Science, where they have shown kind of from some of there's 2 USGA testing sites here where they've collected, baseline data on the nutrient load over different seasons of the year. I think the Wissahickon, we classify a lot of our streams here in Pennsylvania based on the fish life and what the state is.
Macroinvertebrates.
Yes. And so, the state is still willing to put fish in this stream, which is a good thing in a lot of ways. There's other creeks that have lost their, they've just been written off. And ours has not been written off yet. So I'd say maybe 10 years is a harder timeline, from 30 years ago. There's so many changes between, what's going into the water from lawns and treatment plants has probably improved. That water's probably gotten better, but the amount of stormwater runoff that's coming in is larger. So
yeah,
I'm sorry, I keep
no,
taking
no,
over your time.
no. Hey, that's a good point. I think to your question, things might be getting better, but not as better as it was thought, because new problems also arise and unexpected consequences. So the question perhaps is this pace of recovery fast enough, or we're never really going to get it back in? I know, like, for instance, a classic way to determine that is to see what species of insects live in the stream.
Mhm.
3 big, not families, but let's call them families in particular, and they can get an idea of the quality of the stream health or the quality of the water based on that. And that takes, sometimes you will do lots of things that seem like, all right, we should be there, and you might still not be there, and you just got to be patient, because people call it the ecological lift. It takes a while. Things done. We're usually, if I can say something, we're too rushed on where are the results, right? We change all that. Well, they'll come. If you really made it better, 10 years really is not a long time. Sorry, but it's just not. It might take longer than that. And I don't know the numbers exactly for the Wissahickon. My colleague that I was referring to, they do screening all around the Delaware River watershed. And some places are getting better. Some others are seeing not much improvement. I can follow up if you want me to, and give you a better answer.
That data on the Stroud Watershed?
No, it would rather be on the Delaware River Watershed Initiative, probably. Yeah, which is funded by the William Penn Foundation. It is. I mean, you can get it. You can see.
We will share a variety. I think there's a lot of interest in the room, so we'll be happy to share a variety of links to that initiative that was just mentioned, as well as some of the other studies that we've had access to that speak to this creek specifically, the Wissahickon. So I know we have a question in the back.
Yeah.
Thinking about animal agriculture and all the runoff from just wondering, in your circles of travel, are there conversations happening or not happening about what to do about industrial agriculture?
In the Midwest, in particular?
Anywhere, I just love, just I'm really aware of how much industrial agriculture is really our work. So wondering about what it looks like just generally in terms of awareness and action.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I failed to do that.
Oh, we are talking about industrial agricultural waste and what can be done about it. No, I
Oh.
was going to turn it over to you.
Well, you want me to repeat the question or?
Yeah, the question is about industrial agricultural waste and what
Uh,
we're doing about it.
Taking your role away as moderator. Well, in my circles, I have plenty of colleagues who work in areas where that's a bigger issue, I guess, or big deal. That's why I ask about the Midwest. And I think there are conversations. I think there's lots of, for instance, cover crops being implemented and make a big difference for how hard it is to do that, right? Other more transformative changes, like we have a project at the Stroud Center where we've been looking at a small watershed that we converted from conventional agriculture to organic agriculture. And we'll look at what happens in the stream coming out of a change like that. And it's quite positive and interesting. That's all I could say at this time, because that's still not public data. But whether or not that's scalable to industrial agriculture, that's a different question. I think there are lots of realistic conversations on how to do better without paying a toll on the yield that these places produce. That's why I referred before that the problem of water quantity is sort of easy to solve, like, well, more infiltration problem solved. The problem of nutrient pollution, you put runoff and nutrients on the ground, well, you got to come up with a way to do that in a more environmentally friendly way, but keep those yields because we need the grain, right? Or so they say. And that's another discussion too, where the grain goes and what it's used for, and not always actually part of the diet necessarily. Actually, most of it is really not. But bottom line, yeah, there are the most thing I've seen actually happening is the cover crop change, that it's really being implemented and it's really helping a lot, I think, with sediment and nutrient pollution by having always something on the ground. And I've seen that implemented at large scale, which I do think that's at the end of the day, that's the big question, because you can do some things in the way you do agriculture, but can you actually do them at a large scale? Because otherwise they're not going to work, right? Unless you have a solution that could be implemented by farmers all around, it's just not going to get there. And I don't know if organic can do that or not. I wish, but I don't know that. I know here makes sense because farmers might have, smaller parcels and they can sell organic for bigger, they can still make a big profit. Whether or not that can be put in a more industrial ag perspective, really not your guy to answer that question. I'm sorry, but yeah, cover crops would say that's the most promising conversation I heard, and I've seen actually results on the changes that it does to stream health, and I'm pretty happy with it. They make a difference.
We have a question in the back, and I am going to remember to repeat the question after you say it.
So I have a question about something on one of your first few slides with the maps. You had something on there that said first, second, third, and fourth. I don't remember the order.
Oh, yeah.
The length of the miles. I was wondering what that was and how it's connected to climate change and watershed problems.
Yeah.
So we have a question about one of the slides, and I'm sorry, I did not catch all of that, but you know what slide it is. So you're going to talk about the slide.
So in the slide where I have the Wissahickon watershed and the land uses in it, on the top left, I believe there was a bit of a text that said first order, X amount of miles, second order. I reused that slide and that was there, and I didn't talk about it. So good eye, all on me, missed that one. But it's really, I'm not sure that's something, it wasn't that relevant for this talk. We have this weird way to organize networks, and it goes by order. A first order stream, it's a tiny headwater stream. When two of those come together, they form a second order stream. And when a second order stream has another tiny first one coming in, that doesn't do anything. You got to join with another second to form a third order stream. It's this branching, right? You look at the watershed, it always looks like a branching, like a tree, or like our veins and arteries. Just a good way to think about it. Order means just that, where you are in the watershed, the first order, fourth order. When I said the Wissahickon is a mid order, a mid-sized watershed, it's because the Mississippi is a 10th order watershed. That's a big one. So if you're 4th, 5th order, you're not first, you're not near 9. And it's really not fair to say that because things go, as you can imagine, to get to 10th order. That's a lot of
You have to
work.
have some major rivers come
Yeah, I
together.
mean the Ohio River joined,
Yeah.
the Upper Missouri. I mean,
Yeah.
I lived for 5 years in Montana. The Upper Missouri is huge, and that's just the trip of the Mississippi, right? So it does take a lot of time to get to that order. It's logarithmic. It's a different scale, but I had that in there. I thought about discussing it. And thank you for the question. It does give me a chance to say something that usually, we walk these streams. We enjoy these size of stream. Where you fish in this stream, you kind of get connected to that. But if you pay attention to the miles, streams of this size, they're longer, but there's one of them in a watershed like this. In terms of the length of this channel, it's large. There's only one. But then if you actually saw that you had 50 miles of small streams in this watershed, tiny ones, each one of them not very long, but altogether they make 50 miles. So collectively, that's where most of the water, most of the sediment, most of the bank erosion, that's where it happens. It's just not that fancy. And we just don't walk next to them and pay attention. It might just be you might not even have water some of the time. So you kind of miss that. But if you're thinking strategically on making a model on where the nutrient, the sediment is coming from, the headwaters are my concern. That's easy. This is the easy part. So yeah, and as you can see, it would have taken me quite a while to explain all that, but it is important for anybody to understand that it's easy to get attached to this, but once you're down here, it matters what happened up there. And always, always, always upstream, upstream, upstream. When I teach students, sometimes I show them a picture of a forest, a lake, and a stream, and ask them which one would you put together? Which one is the weird? They all say, well, the forest and then the lake and the stream together. There's water in them. Wrong, because the lake and the forest are organized the same way. Stuff grows on top, dies, goes to the bottom, go around. Right? That's how it is.
Yeah.
Everything grows on the top of the lake, dies to the bottom. Everything grows in the canopy of the trees, dies, goes to the bottom, recycle the nutrients and go back. They teach you this when you're a kid as nutrient cycle, right? What the stream does is, right, move that. Stream is a longitudinal. It is the thing, right? You gotta keep in mind the water is moving. When something dies here, that detritus ends up down there. When the sediment or the leaves move, come from there. Somebody down there benefits. Sorry, right? It's a continuum. It moves. And that changed the way we think of it. So when I see problems here, I'm thinking of those small streams out there, because that's where most of the stream or the watershed is. Yeah, not that cool, not that pretty, but they matter. Thank you for the question.
Other questions? I don't see any other questions in the room. I haven't been checking my email. I just want everyone to know I'm getting
Email
questions
too.
from Zoom. They're coming through. We don't have any more Zoom questions. So I'm going to say good night to our friends on Zoom. Thank them for being with us. I'm going to thank you for being with us. You're on the clock.